This movie hit me on a very personal level only because the idea of childhood to adulthood and the idea of when you become an adult. And, you know, even the Christmas sequences when you guys are waking up on Christmas Day, and like my brother and I used to do that all the time. Everyone's been through that and you can relate to that. But there's a moment that your character has, Joe, with Meg, where you essentially say to her, our childhood is gone. Like now we're becoming adults. And I was curious for each of you, do you know that moment in your life or vaguely know that moment in your life where you really kind of felt your childhood slipping away and becoming an adult?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For me, it was when I was 19 and I moved to London. And I remember my mum had come over to help me get settled in, and she left. We were just talking about this, how like lovely it is to have them there, and they've like made dinner for you and the place is clean and all that sort of stuff. And she left, and I remember the day after she left, I was sat on my sofa and I was like, oh, I'm really hungry. And I went to the kitchen and I was like, I don't have any food. And then I thought, oh, I have to go get food, and then I should go cook it, and then I'll have to go and get more food, and then it just keeps going on and on and on. And I had this realization that like, as soon as you leave home, basically, and especially then when you return home after you've left, it's never the same again. And it's because I was doing Brooklyn around the same time, and that was all about homesickness and stuff as well. And that's when it really hit me, was like that year. So.
And for you, I want to hear everyone, because that's just great, cool, really cool. Thank you for that story, by the way. It's interesting.
I feel like I'm going through it now, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, I did Sharp Objects a few years ago, but someone was always with me when I was shooting that show. But I'm living in New York for 6 months at the moment doing a play. And it feels like a proper, though it's not 9 to 5, it feels like, you know, it requires a lot of discipline, and it requires me going to the theatre every day and developing a routine, a daily routine. And I have been by myself, and it's been really odd. And you know, the apartment that I'm in, it's too small to fit anyone beyond 2 people. So I kind of have to live by myself. And my mum and my dad are here right now, and you know, at first it was kind of weird to see them, but then a wave of relief came over me. But I don't know, it's really odd, and I feel like I am going through the motions at this very moment. So.
And for you?
It was probably, I always thought I was independent. And then I went to America when I was 19. It was the first time I'd ever been to America. First time I'd ever
19.
Yeah.
done a long haul flight. And I remember my mum, I was offered if I wanted a car to go to the airport. And I remember going up to my mum being like, Mum, they've offered a car to take me to the airport. And she goes, oh, do you want it? And I was like, oh, well, I mean, if it's too tricky for you to take me. And she was like, no, I'll take you. And I remember we went the whole journey, and I was sat in the car in silence. Whoa. And we were just like, I was only going for a short amount of time, but it was still it was the first big trip that I was doing for my career and for me, and I was all by myself, and I knew that I had to go out there and ace it, which is like such a big thing when you're starting out as an actor, because every job could change your life. And I remember we both got to the airport and had this very slow hug, and I said, but what happens when they ask me at security, like, what happens if they suspect anything? She goes, well, you'll just have to come up with an answer. And I remember thinking like, oh my goodness, I have to come up with an answer. I'm a grown-up.
That's wild. Yeah. That's an amazing, for you, Laura?
I mean, I think it's the same. I think we all share becoming actors at young ages. And for me, maybe similarly to Saoirse, we were children working. And I think I always suspected I was very adult. Until the moment I also moved out. And I think my mother's feeling was, you're 17, but you've already done a number of movies where you're without me, so you're ready for this. And my memory was the first time I was in an apartment, not living with my mom, that I got sick. And there was nobody there. And calling my mom and saying, I'm sick. Waiting for her to say, I'm driving over right now. She was like, well, what are you getting for yourself? And it was just devastating.
Yeah.
But can't you come round?
And we all have which is beautiful for this film, that we all have very deep relationships to our mother. And so for this relationship, it was amazing together to share these mother-daughter bond stories
Yeah.
as we all became so close.
Well, I love this movie. Thank you for the time to wrap me up. I want to live in a world at one point where Joe somehow sees your marriage story speech, because I feel like she would love that dialogue. That needs that. I want to live in that world, like where
Wait to
those.
see it.
Wait till you see it. It's amazing. Congratulations to you all. Thank you so much for
Thank
everything.
you.
You guys are
Thank you
wonderful.
so
and,
much.
I love the way you put the title card up in this movie. It's like in the left corner on the book,
Oh,
essentially.
yeah.
And it's kind of a really interesting way to do it. Can you talk about the decision of that as a filmmaker to pop the title up the way you did it? It's really cool.
Well, the truth is that the way that I always saw the movie from beginning to end, and the way that I play with time, is that I wanted it to feel like a palindrome, that I wanted it to be able to be played forward and backwards. And my idea of the way time is constructed, the way that you start when they're adults and then you move back to childhood, is that it almost feels like a folk art, like a quilt, that it's growing out from the center. And one thing I wanted to do is that the first shot of the film is actually on the back of her head, and the last shot of the film is on her face.
Oh, yeah,
and I wanted it to feel like an album that you could just start it over. And having the book as a physical object in the beginning, and that's how the title appears, and then the book is brought back at the end. I wanted to ground the entire thing in, these are the sacred words that were written by this woman. And I wanted it to have that physical life. And the book is beautiful, and that insignia is beautiful, and that's the original insignia from 1868. And I thought, you go through all these things when you're beginning a movie where you make the slate, you make all this stuff, and I was like, let's do the actual thing, because what's old is new again, and if it's classical, suddenly it's radical.
Yeah, the printing scene was amazing. Some of my favorite themes in this story are the ideas of going from childhood to adulthood. And you think about that moment that Meg has with Joe, where they're having that moment where she essentially says, "My childhood is gone."
Yeah.
Do each of you remember that moment in your own life where you felt your childhood slip away and you kind of became the adult?
What a great question. I don't, I didn't feel the wistful departure in as much as like the actualization of real responsibility, and that didn't feel like being a young person anymore, and that was kind of sad. And I think every person has that moment that's heartbreaking when you realize that your parents are human, and I love my parents and I have great parents, but I think everybody at like 16, 17, you have whatever. For me, it was like somebody flipping a page of a book or something like an action like that even, and it's like, oh, well, we're all just figuring it out. And that's scary because it feels a little hopeless. But that's not what this is about, I guess.
No, I think it's interesting. Do you remember that moment for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the distinction, one thing that was emotional to me in the book and that I wanted to bring out in the movie was, once they're all in their separate adult lives, they're actually never all together again. The thing they miss is already gone. You don't know the last day that you were all together. You just know when it never happened again.
I'm getting chills.
I know. No, I mean, it is true. But this is just to take it here. Joseph Conrad, the great novelist, he has this novella called The Shadow Line. Which is about it's about nautical things, but it's about being passing through things like the equator, and you don't know when you're going through it. You just know when it's passed. And it's about a man who takes over a ship at 27, and that's sort of the shadow line of youth has passed. And I'm always interested, I think, as a filmmaker, at passing through something and you don't realize until it's gone, and then you look back. Because I think cinema's a time capsule.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in sad things that are gone.
And if I could try to add one thing to that, and like poetic failure attempt at it, but like I like that Greta says, and I like that we're talking about time, like the continuum of time in some way, because Saoirse and her embodiment of it, but the way that Greta messes with the linearity of the movie, and the way that Jo is played, she's a victim of the time in some way, and she's a victim of time, period. And that's the thing that was in my mind.
That's really smart, Timothy. Well done.
Thank you.
I want to say one more thing to you. Two of my favorite movies of the year are really literally Little Women and Noah's Film.
Oh,
and they both deal with marriage in very interesting ways, and I found that fascinating. And I really wanted to ask you this question because since you both directed these amazing, powerful films that are taking place in two completely different time zones and genres, did you have conversations about the parallels of how the marriages would play out in regards to the storylines? It's interesting to me.
Well, we didn't have discussions actually about that, but we're super involved with everything the other one does, just in terms of I mean, it's like having someone at home who knows exactly. It's more technical. All of it's technical. It's like I have him look at some footage, and I'm like, "Do you think should I go back and get this angle?" And he's like, "No, I think you've got it. You can cut from here to here." I mean, like stuff like that. It's like boring. We don't talk about like philosophical things. We talk about angles.
That sounds fun to me, to be
Yeah, I
honest.
agree.
Well, they're wrapping
Okay,
up. But
okay.
thank you so
Nice to
much
see you.
for talking
Nice
to
to
me.
see you, yeah.
I want to live in a world